Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 21 Hats podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Feldman. This week, Jay Goltz and special guest Kathy Carroll talk about family businesses, with Jay asserting that they are even more combustible than most people realize, and with Kathy offering some smart coping strategies. We start with Kathy explaining how her own experiences in a family business propelled her to write a book, Hug of War, and to become a family business coach. Why are family businesses so difficult? Well, says Kathy, it's because you're trying to combine a family mindset with a business mindset, which she says is a little like living in socialism and capitalism simultaneously. Of course, she says, it also has to do with mixing love and money. You're just gonna get sparks. And with the brutal challenge of transitioning from one generation to the next, when every decision can feel like a repudiation or rejection. Still, it was that stew of anxiety, resentment, and trauma that helped Kathy find her calling, which is to help others do in their family businesses what she could not in hers. Even in good times, owning and running a business can be a lonely pursuit. Our hope is that these weekly conversations will let owners know they are not alone in facing challenges. Same thing with our daily newsletter, the 21 Hats Morning Report, which Inc. magazine named the best newsletter for business owners and which you can subscribe to for free at 21hats.com. where you can also find transcripts of our podcast episodes and lots of other articles and interviews. Joining me this week on the podcast are Kathy Carroll, a family business coach and author of Hug of War, and Jay Goltz, CEO of the Goltz Group, whose companies in Chicago include a picture frame business, artist frame service, and a home furnishing store, Jason Home. The episode is titled, Family Businesses Aren't Dysfunctional, They're Disastrous. Before we get started, I want to tell you about an upcoming event that you should know about. It's the Great Game of Business Conference. This year's theme is Navigating an Uncertain Future, which, I don't know, seems kind of timely to me. As always, the conference will focus on how you engage and educate your staff to build a company culture where employees feel valued and where owners don't have to solve every problem. Going back more than 15 years, I've been to this conference more times than I can remember. And I've seen some great speakers, great presentations, great discussions. I've even led a few of them. But here's the thing, that's not why I love this conference. I love it because it attracts an amazing array of entrepreneurs and business owners. I've made countless friends there, and I've learned so much from the willingness of great game businesses to share their journeys, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This year's conference is in Arlington, Texas. It runs from September 10th to 12th. You can get more information at greatgame.com, but if you do sign up, be sure to use the code 21HATS. That's the number 2, the number 1, and the word HATS, all run together, which will get you $150 off the list price. And now, on to today's show. Welcome, Kathy and Jay. It's great to have you here. Maybe we could start, Kathy, with you telling us a little about your own experience in a family business.
I'd be happy to. I actually grew up in a family business. My grandfather was the original entrepreneur in our family. And to be honest, there was a lot of drama in my father's generation. So when I graduated from school, I went corporate for 20 years. Started as an actuary, got an MBA, spent 12 years in the travel industry.
I'm sorry, I got to stop you. Was that a deliberate decision to get as far away from the family business as possible? Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, Lauren, that is exactly what I'm telling you.
I wanted to make sure.
Yes, you're dang right. So anyway, in 2009, I was a mid-level executive at United Airlines, and sort of like the Godfather, my father sucked me back into our family business. And I was really reticent about doing it. I had some concerns at a professional level. I had some concerns at a personal level. But net, I decided to give it a shot. My siblings and my mother were supportive. And it was a really interesting experience, to say the least. That's how I got in.
Tell us a little bit how it went.
So my father and I are opposites at almost every level. If he's about privacy, I'm about transparency. If he's about disruption, I'm about calming. If he's about raising your voice, I'm about whispering. It's just, we are sort of on the opposite ends of everything. So as you can imagine, the tension that we experienced when we worked together was pretty real. And of course, at the time, I thought I was absolutely right and he was absolutely wrong. And I was bringing in the countervailing energy that was needed in order to make the business function very, very well. My father's really strong at marketing. I was really strong at finance and operations. And so we just butted heads throughout the entire 3 years that we worked together.
Kathy, if I could stop you for 1 second,
sure.
Could you tell us, he brought you in because he felt he really needed your help, right? And he pretty much gave you the keys to the business and you kind of turned it around, if I'm remembering your book correctly. Am I right?
You are right. Yeah. He needed some professional leadership in the business. So a little bit of background about the business. It's a rodeo equipment manufacturing business. We make ropes and saddles and training equipment for team ropers, which is one of the 8 competitive rodeo sports. And my father got into it shortly after my parents divorced and everyone in our hometown sided with my mom. So my father kind of reinvented himself as not the gentleman country club golfer, but really more the cowboy. And fast forward a few years, his new close cowboy friends were running the businesses and super talented, very bright people and didn't have formal business training and the businesses weren't thriving. So he looked around and said, I need to bring in a professional manager and decided to bring me in. Sort of a side story that I don't mention in the book is that he hired a recruiter to find a professional leader. And the recruiter ended up hiring me and my father paid the recruiter $75,000 to hire his daughter.
God bless those recruiters. Yeah. Wait, how old is your father at this point during the story that when he brought you in?
That's a good question. So I would put him in his mid-70s at that time.
Okay, so there was clearly also a succession thing that he had a problem with. It wasn't just he needed professional help. He's in his mid-70s. He knew that he needed to do something for succession.
He did. Yeah, he did. It's a good point. Yes. So that's how I joined the business. And then, Lauren, remind me the question that you asked because I think I got off track.
Well, I was asking you about why you were brought in and the business was struggling a little bit. You straightened things out and it started performing much better. But then you ran into a problem with your father after that.
Yeah, I mean, there had always been tension in the relationship. But what really started to get south is when we had done a series of strategic planning sessions and he was involved in every strategic plan and bought into what we were doing. We were executing on the plan. And suddenly the general managers who reported to me called me and said, your father just told me to do the 180-degree opposite of what we decided in the strategic plan. And I said, wait, what? And so I try to sort it out. And then another couple of weeks would go by and the same thing. A different general manager would say, your father's telling me to do the opposite of what we had all agreed to do. And this kept happening week after week. So after a few months, I said, I think it's time to talk to my father. I got on his calendar. We actually met and I said, hey, you've been talking about wanting to spend more time golfing, more time with your wife. My parents had divorced, obviously, and he remarried. And I'd like to help make that happen. Let's talk about what success looks like. And then you can hold me accountable to results. And he said, are you asking to be the CEO? And my title was President and Chief Operating Officer. And I said, no, my title doesn't matter. I just think we're confusing the team because we're speaking out of 2 leadership mouths and we need to really align with one strategy to support the execution. And he said, absolutely not. I am the leader of this business and everybody needs to know it. And that's when I realized there was no room for me anymore. And I stepped out of the business, which was soul crushing, to be honest, because I had really built an identity around being the family hero. Like my siblings were really keen on me leading the business, most of them at least, because they saw their inheritance slipping away and they felt confident I had the skills to help support a more productive outcome in the family business. And turns out the turnaround that we put in place was successful. But not from my father's perspective. It was, my father, I think what was far more important to him than profits was having a relationship with his friends. And I think what happened was 2 things. First, his friends started to call me a lot more than they called him. They were getting the leadership and the support that they needed. So they really didn't contact him. And that challenged his relevance and his identity. And I think it triggered the a memory of when he got divorced, and everyone in our hometown sided with my mom in the divorce. And this time, all of his friends were siding with his daughter. And that was too much for him to bear. Now, whether that's actually true or not, I don't know. It might have been a sense that he felt. I don't think it was true. I think he still has great relationships with those folks. But then the other thing that took place was related to me, because when I was leading the business, my mindset was, I need to lead this despite my father to make it successful, even though he's going to do everything to mess it up. So every time the phone rang or an email came in, my mindset was, what does he need this time? Which is really not a very good partnership mindset with the CEO and the full owner of the business. So my ego was out front. I was in my own way. And it actually took me many years after I left the business to be able to see that.
How did the business do after you left?
Well, Lauren, that's a good question. My father terminated every single person that I hired.
Wow.
And the business kind of slipped back to where it was before, sort of bumbling along, some better years, some worse years, but really not thriving the way it had the potential to thrive.
Does it still exist?
It does. It does. And I'll be honest, I don't know much about it these days for one important reason. My father is actually suffering from dementia. And so he doesn't have the cognitive skills to lead the business. He doesn't have the cognitive skills to communicate about business. It's advanced enough that I don't think he even remembers that he owns them. I mean, occasionally he'll remember me when his wife says, well, look who's here. It's your daughter, Catherine. And then he'll say, hello, Catherine. And then he'll encourage me to talk to his wife. So it's a pretty advanced stage of dementia. So he doesn't provide us any information.
So I guess two questions. One, what did you take from this experience? What do you think the lessons are? And two, how did you make the leap from that to being a coach for family businesses?
So first question, gosh, I learned so much. It's even hard to say in a simple podcast. I think at its root, I think I learned that family business leadership is double black diamond hard compared to leadership in a corporation without family members. And it's hard because all of my childhood nonsense was in the way. You know, I was in my mid-40s at the time when I was leading the business, and all my childhood injuries were just as alive then as they were when I felt them in the first place when I was a kid. So I think it creates an incredibly emotionally complex dynamic. And when you think about family business, you're really crossing two of the most emotional things on the planet, love and money. And when you cross love and money, you're just going to get sparks. You're going to get a ton of emotion. And the neuroscience shows that when we're flooded with emotion, our executive skills really diminish. We don't have the same capacities to think in creative, innovative ways when our brains are flooding with cortisol and adrenaline. And I think that happens quite often in a family business. Now, there are some family businesses who don't suffer all those challenges, but I want to meet who those people are, because I think most of the ones that I'm familiar with really face a lot of the challenges. I think another thing that I learned was how I lived in a story of being innocent and pure-hearted and well-intentioned. And I still think that I am, but the reality is my behavior didn't line up with my self-image. And it's so common for us to live in these innocent lamb stories about ourselves when our behavior doesn't actually demonstrate that. And that took me a long time and a lot of humility and soul searching to acknowledge and recognize. So those are probably two of the biggest reasons, and probably the perfect segue into why I got into this work. When I left my father's business, I had this newfound confidence that I could lead, and that was really exciting. I'd always envisioned myself as a good number two, but not as a leader. But in effect, even though my father was CEO, I was really running the show. And I had this really genuine self-confidence that I could lead that I didn't have before. So at first, I looked for a business to buy, but it was shortly after the financial crisis, and there was nothing really good out there. And eventually, all those paths kind of dried up, and I said, all right, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I said, I think I want to be an executive coach, but I didn't really know what that was. So I applied to Georgetown University for their leadership coaching training program. And I'm so grateful to have been accepted because it completely changed my world. And I learned that coaching is not at all what I thought it was. I thought I'd get to tell people how to lead, just do it the way I did it. That is not coaching. Coaches don't have all the right answers. Coaches have all the right questions, which is a very different way to support the development of leaders.
That's true of podcast hosts too.
Is it? That's a great point, Lauren. Yeah. Great podcast hosts that have great questions. Yeah. I also learned that I needed a coach when I was working for my father. And I think my life could have been different if I'd had a coach. I think if my father had a coach, honestly, I'm not sure he's coachable, but even if my grandfather 2 generations ago had a coach before the coaching profession even existed, we could have had a really different life outcome for our family. So I started to see the value of coaching, the impact it could have over generations. And I looked at my life and I said, oh my gosh, this is my calling. This is what I'm meant to do. And so I opened up my practice on July 1st of 2013. That was 11 years and 2 days ago, and I've never looked back.
Jay, have you ever thought about hiring a coach?
No. Well, yes and no. The reason that Kathy's on the podcast is I had reached out to someone I knew who was involved with the university in the neighborhood and said, you know what, I wouldn't mind talking to somebody that gets involved with family business, and they sent me to her. So I did, in fact, talk to her about the whole family business succession planning thing. So yeah, which is the crux of what we're going to talk about today. She's giving you the perspective of being the kid and walking into the family business. And I have the opposite perspective of being the business owner and having the benefit, if that's the right word, of looking at, I'd say, 10 other people I've known in business over the years, and how did that whole family transition thing work out? And it ain't pretty. I only have one story, honest to God. I only know one person who took over the family business. It wasn't from his father, it was from his grandfather, and it's worked out beautifully. He did have some issues with his brother, but they worked it out. But I have 6 other examples of people that I've known well who family disaster, nothing less than family disaster, not talking to the brother, not talking to the father. In one case, suing the parent, suing the father and the brother. So it's fraught with danger, and that's what I want to talk about today, because I think Kathy obviously has more perspective than I have because she's dealt with a lot of businesses. So I want to just see what the options are out there.
Well, in fact, one of the things that I really liked about your book, Kathy, is that you do have a lot of great examples, sadly, as Jay suggested, of family business dysfunction. You know, as a coach, you've obviously seen inside a ton of family businesses. Can you connect the dots for us a little bit? Is there one main typical problem that you see over and over again? Are there, lots of different problems? How do you think about that?
My experience, there are a lot of different problems, but there are some themes that emerge. One of the most common themes, and this isn't going to surprise anyone who's listening, is how hard it is to actually step out of the leadership role. It's a real challenge to transition a business that has become a part of who you are to your children or your nieces and nephews or to anyone else, because you're giving up your identity. And anytime someone makes a decision that's different from how you would have done it, it feels like a rejection and a repudiation of your leadership, which can be really hard on the leader and the founder, particularly the founder. But anytime you have, regardless of the generation, anytime you have a really strong identity attachment to the business, that letting go is brutal. Think about it from a trapeze. You're swinging on a trapeze, you're having a lot of fun, and then somebody's asking you to let go and grab the next trapeze, but there's no bar in front of you. There's no trapeze bar to grab onto. So you're like grabbing at air going, wait a minute, what's going on? And you feel like you're falling, and hopefully you fall into a net that's going to help you. But it can be a really fraught time, because quite often the leading generation has a beautiful image of transferring the business to their children. And it's really this romantic ideal. But when it comes to rubber hitting the road, that transition is really hard. And so instead of thinking about it as a passing a baton from one generation to the next, which is an event that's like a one-time moment, it can be helpful to think about it as a transition over time, which creates the conditions for the rising generation to grow into and build the capacity to take on the responsibilities of leadership, and for the leading generation to find their purpose beyond their role as leader of the business.
Okay, now that's perfect segue. I'm going to give you the complete other perspective as being a business owner. I have concluded after looking at lots of businesses and being in business groups with businesses that there's three problems that are very common, which is why I think you'd agree with this number. You've heard 80% of businesses don't get to the second generation. That seems to be true, right?
That data's been debunked, but let's go with it anyway.
More or less. It's not 50%. A large percentage of businesses, if it's not 80, it's certainly not 50. So whatever it is, here's my my observation. There's three problems here. Number one, the kid is not necessarily wired to take over the business. Maybe they'd be a wonderful musician, a wonderful school teacher, a wonderful lawyer, doctor, stockbroker. They just don't have the innate skills or mindset or stomach to run the business. And it's just the way it is. A large part of entrepreneurship, I believe, is genetics, and some people simply don't have the stomach for it. So that's the first problem. The second problem is, Lauren, you said dysfunctional. That's not even close. It's not dysfunctional. It's disastrous. I never understood, and now I do, the damage that can be done by bringing your kid in with long-term employees that have, given their heart and soul to your company is far more than eye-rolling and nonsense. It could be super serious. Key people could leave. It could be throwing a monkey wrench into the engine. And then lastly, I don't know that you're doing your kid a favor. Maybe you should find something, maybe help them ease into another profession or something, but you think you're doing them a favor and maybe you're not. So this is very tricky. And you spend your entire career doing business, and let's say it's playing basketball, you've got your team, and then all of a sudden you're playing basketball except you're wearing rollerblades now. So now while you're playing basketball, you have to worry about falling and cracking your head open. That's kind of what it's like. You're going to go from all business to now all of a sudden you're not bringing one person, and there's a fallacy. You're bringing in a lot of people. Now you're bringing in the kid's mother or father, meaning your spouse, your ex-spouse, maybe the spouse of your kid, maybe the in-laws.
Jay, you don't mean bringing them in literally in terms of giving them jobs.
No, but they're involved. Yeah, no, I'm talking
They're involved
about
indirectly because their opinions matter and they talk.
Absolutely. My lawyer just told me a story that he has a client, his daughter worked for him, and she got into a big fight with his secretary of 20 years, and he sided with his secretary. And now she left, and the wife is divorcing him. Her book's filled with stories like this. This isn't dysfunctional. This is disastrous, trying to get a square peg in a round hole. So I think, so my question to you, Kathy, is how often does this work?
Well, I agree with everything you said, Jay. You summarized some of the really intense complexities so beautifully. And I'll put slightly different language on it. It's when you transition to that next generation, you're wearing a parent hat and a boss hat at the same time. And those two hats are in constant conflict.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes it so hard. Because the rules of the game of the family are different from the rules of the game of the business. And so you create this incredible strain in the leaders and in all of the family members, because you've got these two competing right answers. You've got the competing right answer of business, which is about profits and competition and meritocracy. And then you've got these family right answers, which are all about fairness and sharing and unconditional belonging. And those, if you think you can run a family business just like a business, I think it's a fallacy, especially in the early years. Maybe when you're a professionally run, like Ford example is considered a family business, the motor company.
Right.
And that is run like a business. There are a few, and I don't know anyone at Ford, so I'm not guessing, but I think for the most part, the family dynamics are at bay there. But for most family businesses that are not at that level of professionalism, you've got these really complex competing dynamics that are in play. Now, what the Ford family probably deals with is those dynamics at the family office level, which is a whole nother level of complexity. Because when you're talking about a family business, you've got some of the same tensions as you have when you're talking about a family office. Because again, you've got the rules of the business and the rules of the family, and they are in competition. So with all of that said, what does it take for it to be successful? It takes a lot of really hard work. I think a lot of patience, a lot of tolerance for duality, for paradox. I talk about it in the book, and I call it polarities. It's two opposing truths that coexist at the same time. When you want to pick an either or, your brain wants to choose one or the other. And the reality is, in a family business, you have to hold two opposing truths together at the same time. And it takes a lot of, I would say, not just brain capacity, but heart capacity to do it well.
But I want to hear you say it doesn't always work. Does it always work?
It does not always work. It does not always.
That's all I wanted to hear, because I believe that to be true. And I'm going to tell you what really bothers me about books I read. They'll say, oh, if you have family members that aren't doing the job, you need to fire them. That's the end of that's the entire analysis, instead of they're your kid, for God's sakes. I think that maybe deserves another couple of sentences. It's not that simple, for God's sakes. It's your kid, and your kid paid the price in a lot of cases for you having a successful business. You weren't home during Saturdays and Sundays. You were constantly under pressure. So it's not that simple at all to just go ahead and dismiss. Oh, if you got family members that aren't working out, you need to fire them. Oh, great. That's just it might be that simple, but it certainly doesn't reflect the pain and angst of that whole thing.
Jay, I couldn't agree more. I think you hit the nail on the head. And one of my hopes and wishes with this book is that the professionals who serve family businesses will get out of this simplistic thinking. Just fire him. If he's not performing, get rid of him. It's way more simplistic than the reality is. It's a complex dynamic. And too many of the professionals who serve family businesses oversimplify that complexity and make it, well, just run it like a business.
Right.
And that's naive, in my opinion.
Wouldn't it be nice if these professionals that say, well, you just have to run, if they said, listen, Bob, I know this is difficult, but I just want you to think about this. Are you sure this is best for your son or daughter? And on top of that, let's just try to be objective here. Is there any reason to believe you're going to be able to fix it? Just help them work through this in their head. Just don't go throw out Bob, well, if this wasn't your son, would you have fired him? Well, that's the answer. Okay, it's just not that simple. This is extremely difficult and tricky and requires both a business sense and a people sense. And I believe some of the quote unquote professionals that are out there could be doing better with this subject. That's all.
Kathy, I really liked the line you had in the book about how working in a family business is like living in socialism and capitalism simultaneously, because you got the business interests and the family interests. I don't remember if it's chapter 1, but very early you deal with the issue of compensation and how family members are paid. Are they paid at a market rate, or are they paid at a family rate? I'm curious, do you see that as a kind of a key dividing line that separates one family business from another? And is there a right answer or a wrong answer to how family members should be paid?
I love this question. And this is chapter 1, actually. So let's talk about it. From the business mindset, how do you pay your children? You pay them a market wage, duh. From a family mindset, how do you pay your children? Well, I don't want them to think I love one more than the other. And I don't want to create competition amongst my children. And, they're all raising my grandchildren. I want them all to go to good schools. So I'm just going to pay them all the same. Let's just pay them all the same. It'll be fine. And everyone will get paid the same. Well, that works for maybe 1 or 2 generations, but by the 3rd generation, it tends to fall apart. And is there a right answer? There isn't a right answer, because every family has to figure it out for themselves. And the way I describe it in the book, I say, well, let's get really clear about what are the benefits of market pay. Talk about it. And you just and each family identifies what those benefits are. And then, what are the benefits of equal pay? If you paid everyone the same, and you get everyone in the family agreeing to what those benefits of equal pay are. And then you change the question from, should I pay equal or pay market? And you change it to, how do I get the best of equal pay and the best of market pay at the same time? And it creates a completely different set of creative problem solving, innovative thinking that says, maybe I'll pay them all the same base, but then we'll bonus differently. Or maybe we'll pay bonus the same and we'll give different bases, based on the market wage. And there are an infinity number of different ways you can construct compensation that gets the best of equal pay and the best of market pay.
Or the fact of the matter is, many of these business owners are older. The fact of the matter is, they might have enough money, and it might simply be a case of, okay, here's what your salary is going to be, but the profit we're going to split up as the inheritance. Your sister's going to get a portion. She doesn't work in the business. Your brother doesn't work in the business. And so you get this, but then as far as, well, I want my grandchildren. Okay, well, they can get the same percentage of the business as profit sharing or inheritance. So it takes care of that problem. And it's two different things. The fact of the matter is, I've got to think most business owners, if they're successful, when they get into their 60s, 70s, they don't have to pull as much money out. And for estate tax purposes of not paying estate tax, they'd be better off paying it out to their kids, but they could simply pay it out as the percentage of the family ownership. That's all. And that takes care of some of the cash problems of it.
Yeah. I think, Jay, that's a really common way to think about it. And what's interesting is that family businesses are a system, and it's a dynamic system that changes over time. So now fast forward another generation, and you have a son who is an employee of the business and an owner, and you have a daughter who is not an employee, but she's an owner, right? So if there aren't regular distributions, what relationship does she have to this business? She may be multi-millionaire on paper, but she's got nothing. She's got no connection to the business other than distributions. And so when you get into the conversation about, all right, we've generated X million in profits, are we going to reinvest it in the business, or are we going to harvest it for the family? Wrong question. It's you set it up as a polarity. You say, well, what's the best part of investing back in the business? What's the best part of harvesting, and how do we get the best of both? So it creates I love that example, because in the short run, it may address one issue, but then it sets up the conditions for a different polarity that needs to get managed. And these tensions are constantly getting managed in different ways over time based on the needs of the family and the needs of the business.
In summary, it's very tricky.
Well,
Let me ask you about another situation, Kathy. I know someone who has a construction business. When this happened, he was probably mid-60s, 3 sons. He kind of decided to have a bake-off to see who would take over running the business with the 3 sons. But he decided to stipulate that the first thing you need to do if you want to compete in this bake-off is you have to promise that when you get married, you will have your spouse sign a prenup. The only problem with that was that his oldest son was already married. So in that case, it had to be a postnup, which proved to be extremely difficult. I'm curious if you have any reaction to that situation.
Yeah, that actually happens quite a lot. And it's this really challenging. It's another polarity, big surprise. It's doing what's right for me and doing what's right for us. There's a tension between me and we, or me and us. And what's right for us, the family concludes, is to do this prenuptial or postnuptial agreement. And it makes all kinds of sense. There's tons of justification for it. And that might not be what's right for me if I'm the older son and I've already been married, and creating the conditions for a postnup is massively disruptive to my marriage. Again, it's really, really hard because you've got 2 truths. It's right to do what's right for me, and it's right to do what's right for us. You see how that's like this incredibly complex tension that's constantly being managed? It's just another example of a polarity that needs to get addressed. So how do you do it? What are the upsides of doing right by me? What are the upsides of doing right by us? And how do you get the best of both?
And the problem as a business owner, if you gave equity away to your kids and they now are part own the business, and one of your kids gets divorced, you're in the middle of the divorce. They're going to want to appraise the business. And all of a sudden you have your future ex-daughter-in-law or ex-son-in-law. Their lawyer has rights to go look through your books. So that's a whole nother issue. Do you actually give your kids stock in the company? And how does that all work? And then what about the ones that don't work in the company? And then you've got one kid that wants to grow. And to your point, the other one would like to take some cash out so they could move or put their kids in a better school or whatever. And my whole point is it worth it all?
Wait, Jay, when you say, is it worth it all? Do you mean starting and building a business? Is that worth it all?
No. Is it worth it all to bring your kids to go ahead and attempt to get your business to get to the second generation?
If they want to come in, could you imagine telling them, no, you can't come in?
I think that happens. Absolutely.
Does that happen, Kathy?
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%.
Wow.
And then there's the whole thing about, being in business requires, you have to be devoted to taking care of customers. Some kids don't can't get that. You got to support and respect your employees. Some kids don't get that. And you have to have the stomach for it. Business goes up and down. And here's an interesting genetic piece of it. You know, the old expression, opposites attract. Well, opposites get married. So the entrepreneur, whether it's the wife or the husband, probably is independent and takes risks and, you know, has a strong stomach. And the spouse perhaps is the opposite of that. Well, when you have kids, which one's coming out of the womb? The one who doesn't like risk or the one that thrives on risk? So like there's a genetic problem here. It's not like you're breeding horses where you take the two fastest horses and put them together. I mean, if you have 3 kids, it is unlikely that all 3 of them, maybe none of them, are going to have the same stomach for business that the mother or the father has. That's just simple genetics. And that's partially why this whole thing is so fraught with potential problems.
Here's the family hat thing. I've got 3 kids, and you know what? I'm a little worried that one of them's going to really struggle in the world. So I'm going to create a really successful family business to create a safe place for all 3 of my children to thrive, especially the one that I'm the most worried about. And that can be really, really problematic because you are undermining their ability to build their own self-confidence. If they know that the business has been created to create safety for them, then they live in a story of not good enough. I was never good enough. My parents had to give me this business in order for me to live. And it's not uncommon for these businesses to go through. There was one I write about in the book where the business got massively disrupted by technology, and the son was in his 40s raising his own children, and he was just so disappointed in his life, disappointed in the choice that he made to join the family business, disappointed that he was letting his kids down, letting his parents down, letting himself down, letting his wife down. He was miserable because he felt so much of an obligation to step into the business that the parents created for him. There's another client that I know, they have 3 kids. One is really not thriving, and he's miserable because he feels like his 2 siblings can't stand him because he's not performing and delivering the same way his siblings are delivering. And he doesn't know how to. It's an industry he doesn't really like. He doesn't know much about it. He just wants to be a part of the family. He wants to belong. And he doesn't feel like he belongs. And so he's in absolute misery. And the rest of the siblings are miserable too because they're sick of carrying his dead weight.
Which is why I say this isn't about dysfunctional. This is about disaster. It's way beyond dysfunctional. This is about ruining people's lives. And I know off the top of my head 6 families that have been destroyed where they don't talk to each other. One of them is a cousin of mine. When his brother just died a few months ago, his brother didn't list him in the obituary, like he didn't exist. It's lawsuits, never talking to him. The father dies. They have to have 2 separate funerals because the brothers won't be in the same room together. I mean, this is not an uncommon story. And I don't know. I doubt that there's as much out there in the world that could rip apart a family as badly as a family business.
Kathy, you give a great example in the book. Correct me if I get any of this wrong, but I think it's a successful serial entrepreneur who sells his businesses, decides he wants to start one more specifically because he wants to start a business for his daughter to take over. She brings in her husband, his father's son-in-law, and it just goes all wrong. And the founder wants to fire everybody, especially his son-in-law, but he knows he can't do it because he's the father of his grandkids and everybody's angry. Was there a resolution to that situation?
It's a good question. I actually caught up with him about a year ago. Yes, I think there was a resolution. The husband left the business and the daughter left the business. So I guess Jay's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And they are going to sell the business. They're going to sell it into a roll-up, a strategic buyer. So yeah, they're not going to go down the family business route.
So here's the interesting part, which is right into the sweet spot of 21 Hats. An extremely accomplished, successful entrepreneur might not be equipped to deal with this. They have absolutely, it's like they're a great golfer. They're used to getting in the water and the sand, except now there's a hurricane. They're not used to playing golf in a hurricane. This is not something that the typical entrepreneur is equipped to deal with because, to Kathy's point, now it's your family. It has nothing to do with business on some level. So this is not something that most people have the skill set, the mindset, and then you got your husband or wife going, you can't do that. Well, they need a new house. And you might even hear from the in-laws of your daughter-in-law, your son-in-law. I mean, it's like I said, it's not one, you're bringing your whole family into the business, which is why I contend, sometimes, find a different path.
So, Kathy, for somebody listening to this podcast who's thinking, oh my God, this is all about me, I'm living that life right now, what hope can we offer? I guess to start, is there some sort of thought process that you suggest people go to assess what their next step might be if they sense they're headed in this unhappy direction?
Yeah, fortunately, the consulting space in family businesses has actually matured quite a bit in 30 years. So there are some really wonderful family business consultants out there that can support families that are dealing with these complex challenges. Because as Jay said, it's really hard. And when you bring in a third party who has not just experience, but has some wisdom to access, it can be really supportive to facilitating a successful transition if everyone decides that that's what they want to do. And what's beautiful about the consulting world is that they will support the family to not pursue the family business if that's what the family wants to do as well. So I think, and if you Google family business consultants, there are a bunch of them that come up, do your homework and find the right people. I don't do consulting. I'm a coach. So I'm really in the head and the heart and the soul of the leader.
Well, what's the distinction you're drawing there, Kathy? What's the difference between a consultant and a coach?
Yeah, good question. So consultants are professionals who are giving people a path forward. They're giving people the right answer. They may do it in the form of asking some really good questions, but the end game is for the consultant to guide the family towards a solution. The coach is in the space of development. It's development of the leader's capacities to lead in the way that they want to lead. And it might be for the leading generation, expanding their leadership toolkit, for the rising generation, preparing for greater leadership responsibilities. And I love working with non-family executives in a family business because they're witnessing this complex dynamic and it's incredibly challenging. And there are often some super talented people who have specific industry expertise that the family wants to leverage, but they might be derailing as a leader in the business. Those are some of my favorite clients to work with.
So I would say you're doing coaching versus strategy. These other people help more with the strategy as to what are the different ways you can solve this, which makes perfect sense. The people that you're dealing with, I presume, have made the decision, we're going to pursue this particular strategy and help this person do that. And the other people are trying to figure out what should our strategy be. And maybe it's get the kids out of the family business.
I mean, at the oversimplified level, coaches have all the right questions. Consultants have all the right answers. That's an oversimplification. That's a way to think about it.
Well, actually, let me ask you a further question about that, Kathy. You started when I asked you about what somebody should be thinking about if they're struggling with this, and your first response was there are a lot of great family business consultants out there. Why did you start by recommending a consultant as opposed to someone who does what you do?
Well, because I'm shy and humble and I want to make it about me. No, I mean, that's a good question, Lauren. And I'd say if a leader's really struggling with a decision, then a coach can be a brilliant place to go sit in the question and determine what is holding that person back from making a choice. Coaches slow the conversation down. They poke around on the emotions. They try to help clients get clear on the definition of terms. And they're really holding a container for the client to do the hard work. I know it sounds like goofy, coachy mumbo jumbo, and that's kind of how I see it.
Jay, I think I know the answer to this question, but can you tell us what's your general reaction when someone suggests to you that you hire a consultant to help you with a particular issue?
I have PTSD from the half a dozen consultants I've hired over the years for whatever. And I'm sure there's some wonderful ones out there, but I'm also sure there are some not wonderful ones out there that will start sending you $8,000 invoices every month. And I'm sure there's some great people out there that have changed people's lives that are great, but I cringe a little bit.
Kathy, do you have any advice for how to hire a good consultant?
To me, the best consultants keep the decision authority in the hands of the client. They can make recommendations and they can make observations and ask good questions, kind of like coaches. Coaches ask different questions. The consultants are asking more, I don't know, maybe it's more Socratic questions. Maybe it's more, I don't know, the coaching questions are more about the person, more about the leader, more about what's making it hard, more about the internal dialogue. The consultant's questions are more about the situation, the circumstances. What do they want? What are their choices? That kind of thing. Gosh, what advice do I have? I'd say interview a bunch and trust your intuition that you'll find the right person.
You made me think of what bothers me with this subject. And it goes with lawyers, accountants, everyone else, any professional you hire. It depends on your personality. I want the kind of person who's going to spend some good time, looking at the situation. I want the person who's going to look me in the eye and go, Jay, I think you're kidding yourself. If you do this isn't going to work. Versus what I've learned, like I've talked to accountants about this. They don't want to lose the account. And they know that if they tell you the truth, you might get mad and blow the account. So they just don't tell you. They just play along. And that's a real problem for me. I want someone that's going to say, you're being an idiot. You better put some controls in for your inventory. You're going to have a problem.
I think it's a good point, Jay. I agree that there are a lot of consultants who are scared to speak the truth for fear of losing the job. But the ones that I hire are the ones that don't need the money, so they can speak the truth. Great.
And I think this could help interviewing people to ask them, do you ever tell the client that I don't think this is going to, and see what they say. I mean, if nothing else, don't be naive as in everything else. To your point, interview 3 or 4 of them and ask them tough questions. Ask them, tell me about a time where you told the owner of the business that you're wasting the time and they fired you. Tell them, has that ever happened? And see what their reaction is. They might be dumb enough to go, oh, no, I would never tell a client that. Okay, that's all I need to know.
Kathy, to kind of wrap up a little bit, do you have a success story that you could share with us? An example of somebody who struggled a little bit but figured it out and got it right?
Let's finish on the positive. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. One of my very first clients, she's just fierce. She's just phenomenal. She was 27 when I met her. And she was locking horns with both her father and her father's wife, which was not her mother. And I worked with her for about 18 months. And she's just a spectacular human being. She is now the president of the organization. She's got 4 kids of her own. She's rocking and rolling. She has taken the world by storm. And I just adore this person. She's extraordinary in so many ways. And man, it did not look good for her when we first met.
What did she do right?
She looked inside. She looked inside herself and she got really clear on her priorities and she found some humility. And she thought about the long game. She's definitely playing the long game and is very clear on what it's going to take to get the success that she wants. She's got Jay's hunger, her passion for entrepreneurship, and she's smart enough to make it happen, and she's doing exactly that.
Did you help at all in getting, because this is really interesting to me, so you obviously helped her, but was any of this, did you help the father and the stepmother figure out how to work better together, or was it all just from working with her?
It was mostly working with her. At one point, they asked me to facilitate a family conversation, and I said, that feels a lot like therapy, and I'm not a therapist, so I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do that. And the father said, well, Kathy, I appreciate your honesty there, but we really only can use you because you're the only person that my daughter trusts. And I said, okay, well, there's another reason I can't work with you guys as a family. And that is I have a real problem with your wife.
Wow.
And he said, well, now I know you're the right person for us.
Wow. Yeah, no, good for you and good for him. That's what I'm talking about. Good for you for saying that to him. God bless you. That's the person I want to work with.
I ended up doing that work, supporting the family in that way. And it was actually, I think, a really critical piece of the puzzle. So in retrospect, I'm glad I did it. And I did not offer therapy. I was just a facilitator.
On that note, my thanks to Kathy Carroll and Jay Goltz, and to our sponsor, The Great Game of Business, which helps businesses use an open book management system to build healthier companies. You can learn more at greatgame.com. Thanks, everybody.
Wait, don't leave yet. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like the 21 Hats owners to address, send it to me by replying to your morning report or by email at lauren@21hats.com. That's LOREN @21hats.com. Do it now before you forget. And don't be afraid to tell Jay what you really think. He can take it. And if you got something out of this conversation, help us reach more business owners. Tell a friend. Subscribe and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to The Morning Report at 21hats.com. This episode was produced by Jess Thuberon, founder of Blank Word Productions. Okay, now you can leave. Thanks for listening, everyone.